But before getting into that, as a college athlete, what was your perspective on getting paid, when you were participating in the sport?
Sure. I mean, it never really occurred to me per se when I was an athlete, just because I knew A, it wasn't permissible, and B, I mean, as a student athlete, especially at a Power 5 school like Nebraska, I mean, we get so many amazing benefits and resources that, for anyone to ask for more is quite frankly, a little rude.
Okay. This is the Commonwealth, where we feature the unique people changing our world. Today's guest is Christopher Aumueller. Chris is the founder and CEO of Fanword, which is a storytelling agency for athletes, teams, and brands. Chris was a college athlete himself and is now working on the forefront of NCAA's new name, image, and likeness rules. Chris, thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thanks for having me, Nick.
Yes, yeah. Before we get too far into the conversation, let's have a word from one of our biggest sponsor of the Commonwealth, Runza Restaurants. One of my favorite meals of all time is chili and cinnamon rolls, which is a staple at Runza and is now back on the menu. It's a delicious combo of sweet and savory. Even if you don't dip the chili or the cinnamon rolls in the chili, who doesn't like having a dessert for a meal? However, if you're not from the Midwest like Chris, you may think this combo is crazy. Chris, have you ever heard of chili and cinnamon rolls before coming to Nebraska?
Certainly not before coming to Nebraska. No.
Have you ever tried it?
I sure have, yeah.
Have you tried it from Runza?
It's pretty delicious, yeah.
Yes, it is. Yes, like one of my favorite times is Runza's chili and cinnamon rolls. But Runza is kind of like has a German hearty meal, and you're from Germany, right? So what do you normally get from Runza when it's not chili and cinnamon rolls?
Honestly, I'm pretty much fair game to the entire menu. I don't really have a favorite per se, but believe it or not, I'm not a huge fan of sauerkraut and stuff, which is, when you think of German food, that's something that often comes to mind. And when you think of Runza, I know that they have, which are pretty good, not gonna lie, but nonetheless, it's just usually I'm more of the traditional, burger stuff.
Okay,
yep.
I like it. Well, Runza, it makes it all better. Now going into the conversation, Chris. So to start with, it is nice to have a friend as a guest on the show.
Sure.
Yes, most of the time I don't have a personal relationship with the person I'm interviewing. So thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thanks for having me. Looking forward to this.
Yes, yeah, and it was also, I guess, fun to do research on you because I think of you primarily as an entrepreneur. Mm-hmm. And when I was researching your career as an athlete, I didn't appreciate how good of an athlete you were. That you were ranked the 99th best tennis player in Germany at one point. You were the Big 12's newcomer of the year, and you were a first team All Big Ten for tennis. And now I think of you as an entrepreneur. So how did that transition away from sports to launching a professional career go for you?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I've always had an entrepreneurial knack, if you like. Even as a teenager, I launched a graphic design discussion board back home in Germany when I was 16 years old, and we grew it to the third largest in the country within 2 years. So I've always liked building stuff and being kind of, front and center of again, building something. So the transition per se wasn't anything unique, especially since I stayed in sports and really used a lot of the things that I have learned as an athlete and that kind of fascinate me about sports and implemented it into the business. So, the challenges that come with being an entrepreneur weren't necessarily, entirely new. The responsibilities that you have as an athlete and the time management skills that you have to have and the, determination and the, all of these kinds of skills that are relevant in sports, they translate really well into entrepreneurship as well. So it wasn't that challenging of a transition just from that angle. So yeah.
Yes, yeah. So, and especially the caliber of an athlete that you were, I'm sure that you devoted a lot of energy to tennis throughout your life. Mm-hmm. Is that fair?
Absolutely. I started playing tennis when I was, I think, 5 or 6 years old, and at first certainly took it a little easier, but then age 10 or age 11. Don't quote me on this, but that's when I started taking it more seriously, played more tournaments, realized that there's a little bit of talent, and just kind of never looked back.
Yeah, and was it difficult to, I guess, leave tennis at the caliber that you were performing at?
Yeah, it was, to be honest with you. I played at a relatively high level, not just in college, but also back home in Germany, and there were a lot of people that encouraged me to give the professional tour a try, and I had a lot of friends that were doing it and just had a really good insight into what it takes to be a professional tennis player, to get to a point where you can live off of it and really make a living off it. And to be very frank with you, I just didn't think I would reach that level. For a variety of reasons, and no need to, find an excuse here, but I just, looking back, I kind of regret it a little bit. I wish I would have given it a shot just to kind of see how far I could go, especially since a lot of the people that I did play against, whether it's in college or back home in Germany, did take that leap of faith and did really well. So I would have loved to kind of see at least how far I could have made it, give it a try for a year or two, and just, then reevaluate. But it's not, regret is maybe the wrong word, because, I'm proud of where I'm at today, and I'm sure I would have been at a different spot today if I, didn't, go into entrepreneurship right after college. But nonetheless, part of me is still always wondering what could have been, maybe a little bit.
Yes, absolutely. And it seems like an interest, or like a similar mindset to pursue a professional tennis career. It's similar to entrepreneurship in the sense that it's an uncertain outcome. Mm-hmm. Like you put a bunch of energy into it, but who knows what it'll turn out. So then, leaving college, you started Fanword, and at that time it was a media outlet for non-major college sports, correct?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, the idea for the company really came from my time as an athlete, where I wanted to bring a little bit more of the spotlight to some of the sports and athletes that weren't always in the spotlight, that didn't always get the recognition, in my opinion, that I felt like they deserved. And that's really what sparked the idea back in the day. And you're absolutely right that the first iteration of the company was to essentially launch a social networking app for college sports fans, that essentially allowed fans to determine, their favorite teams, their favorite schools, their favorite sports, and then based on their preferences, they would get personalized news and ranking updates and schedule updates, but really make this inclusive of all, regardless of what the sport was, what the school was. And the why hasn't really changed since I started the company. It's really the how that has changed, because we developed the app, we had some great success early on, but in all honesty, we ran into a few challenges that just, I take full responsibility for. First-time entrepreneur, there were a lot of things I could have and should have done better. But at the end of the day, they all led me to what we're doing today. And
what was one of those things that, looking back, you would have done differently with the experience you have now?
I think I was when we built this social networking app, I was focusing very, very heavily on product development. I was not a developer. I worked with a great team here in town that did a phenomenal job, but we pushed it too far, meaning we should have launched this way sooner, gather some input, gather some feedback and then reiterate, rather than putting a lot of resources, financial as well as labor resources, into building something that when we then launched, it was just a little bit too late, because a lot of our resources by that point were exhausted then, and we should have approached this differently, or I should have approached this differently. So that was one of the mistakes for sure.
At what point did you decide to kind of revamp the business model?
Well, yeah, it was funny. So as a way to promote the app, we started telling stories of athletes that, once again, may have not always been in the spotlight, or stories that you may have never heard of. And I'll never forget this. And the goal obviously was to drive people to, our website or to the app store and then download our app, which, granted, those stories that we were telling was different content than the one that we were providing on the app, right? So it wasn't entirely a great fit per se, but nonetheless, that was our marketing strategy early on, at least. And I'll never forget this. The very first story we ever told was with a Husker athlete, and it was retweeted by the volleyball account within less than a minute. And I was celebrating and thought, oh my God, yes, we're gonna get hundreds and thousands of downloads of our app. That resulted in like 5 app downloads. And we had, there were all sorts of challenges from, how we converted people, what happened after they clicked on a story. And that was on our end that we could have improved upon. But nonetheless, that was really a wake-up moment too, where we all realized, holy cow, this is going to be a lot harder than we may have anticipated based on our initial research. So we started telling these stories more and more, grew the app, did that consistently, reiterated some of the onboarding process and stuff. And what we realized after a while was, telling those stories was really more aligning with why we started this and what we were trying to accomplish. B, it was more aligned with our strength and our expertise. And C, it was also a more straightforward business model to success. Meaning we kind of wanted to essentially offer this as a service to athletic departments. That's kind of what the idea became, I guess, of after seeing how much value there was and how much not just athletes, but also fans really enjoyed these stories and how they outperformed other type of content. So then we realized there might be an opportunity to do this actually for schools rather than build out our own media platform, try to monetize, traffic again, which, is a challenge in itself, as I'm sure you know.
Yes, I'm very familiar.
So it just kind of changed, the perspective a little bit. And it was also during a time when some other platforms in that space became a little bit more popular. So the timing was good too. So we started just having conversations with athletic departments to get a feel for their content needs and their creative needs. And that's just then how it all started.
And then, so Fanword's business, I guess, product now is partnering with an athletic department like the Nebraska Huskers and then writing content for the athletes. So
Sure.
Fanword just wrote the blog for Lexi's son, which is who's one of the best Nebraska volleyball players. It was all about her, why and how Nebraska's changed her life. Does that resemble the majority of content Fanword?
It's a good way to summarize it. Probably, more generally speaking, there's really 2 products, if you like, that we provide. The first one being us creating storytelling platforms for athletic departments, for sports teams, for leagues, and populating those with stories about their athletes, their coaches, their fans, their alumni in a variety of formats, whether that's written content or audio content or video content, really all a matter of the overall objectives, budget, timeline, whatever that comes down to. We're very big on the strategic side of things, but you're spot on. We're definitely mostly known for written content, where we write content from a storyteller's perspective. So we kind of ghostwrite it almost, just give stories a little bit more authenticity and personality. And we're big on highlighting, the personal side of those storytellers rather than, you mentioned Lexi, rather than just talk about volleyball. We're really about talking about Lexi and her story and what defines her and what just really get cover stuff that traditional media doesn't always cover. So that really, the storytelling platform and populating that with content, that's really our most popular service that we do for a lot of athletic departments and such. But the second product is the one that we just launched. But we're pretty focused on what our expertise is and what we do, and that certainly is one of them. Yeah.
So there's been a bunch of talk, especially recently, on college athletes getting paid and what's the best way to structure that, and then the name, image, and likeness thing comes into play. But before getting into that, as a college athlete, what was your perspective on getting paid, when you were participating in the sport?
Sure. I mean, it never really occurred to me per se when I was an athlete, just because I knew A, it wasn't permissible, and B, I mean, as a student athlete, especially at a Power 5 school like Nebraska, I mean, we get so many amazing benefits and resources that, for anyone to ask for more is quite frankly, a little rude.
Okay.
I mean, so I was beyond grateful just to have the opportunity to represent the Huskers, to get all access to those resources and benefits that, it's just unheard of when you're not from here and grow up with college sports. It's amazing. So, never really occurred to me. Now looking back, right, and I'm thinking, what would I do, in 2021 if I was an athlete again, and those rules are in place? I mean, I'm beyond excited for the opportunities that come with it, from a former athlete's perspective, but obviously also from a business angle now. But yeah, it's just going to be, it's a very exciting development. Yeah.
Yeah, and it actually perfectly segues to my next question so this name, image, likeness, which is NCAA's proposed rule change that allows athletes to make money on their persona, so they can sponsor things on social media, or even make advertisements for companies. First off, is that a good summary of the rules?
Pretty accurate, yeah. Okay. I mean, it's a way for athletes to monetize their name, image, and likeness, their brand, really, if you like, yeah.
Okay, and exactly how will that change college sports exactly?
I mean, that's a great question, and I know a lot of people have different thoughts on it. I think that the part of college sports that it will impact the most is recruiting. Because when student athletes look at it from if they have a variety of schools to choose from, previously or up until now, really, factors like the scholarship offer, academics, athletics, location, coaches, teammates, all of those factors were really, that is what determined eventually often for athletes to make that decision. Where do I go to school for the next 4 years? And we're just adding another variable in there. And whether we like that or not, schools will at some point have to provide something for their athletes, because otherwise they're just left out. If an athlete has an offer from 5 Power 5 schools, and 4 offer a program or some sort of support to help them build their personal brands and monetize their personal brands, that one school that doesn't, it's very hard for them to compete on it, because it's just going to become a very important variable, whether, no matter where you stand on the issue, it's just what it is. Yeah.
How do you plan to position Fanword to be a leader in this? Mm-hmm. What will you guys be doing 5 years from now that you're not doing today with this new rule change?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the next one of the exciting things about being one of the first companies in that space is you're part of it from the get-go, meaning whatever will happen, you're likely going to be a part of it. And that's exciting, because over the next couple of years, the whole industry will change, and it's going to be a little bit of the Wild West with all sorts of brands trying to come in and tap into it. And we like the fact that we already have plenty of relationships with, some of the biggest schools in the country and conferences and stuff. So it's an exciting position for us to be in. But to answer your question, I mean, one of the big challenges, for the lack of a better word, that we're seeing is that a lot of the conversations right now, they kind of revolve around, how much money can Trevor Lawrence make off of his social media? Mm-hmm. That's what a lot of athletes see. That's what a lot of, media outlets look at. That's what athletic departments read about. But there's going to be, less than 500, maybe less than 1,000. Let's simplify. Let's say 1% of all 500,000 student athletes that will fall into this category.
Yeah.
That, have a huge social following, have a very strong personal brand, and where brands will just, seek them out to collaborate with. The other 99%, they will need a little bit more help. They will need help to be seen, to be discovered. And the conversation shouldn't necessarily always revolve around, how much money can this athlete make off of his social or his NIL or her NIL, but rather, building that brand that can lead to monetization. But whether that results in $5,000 a year or some free product and free services or $100,000 a year, shouldn't always dictate that conversation. Because if I think back through my days and I would have had an opportunity to make, $5,000 a year by, let's say collaborating with local businesses here or local tennis shops here, mm-hmm. I would have done that in a heartbeat, and it would have made me the happiest person. And I feel like that is not often stressed enough, that this really is something that benefits every single student athlete, regardless of the sport they play, regardless of the social following that they have right now, and regardless of the school that they compete for. So that's really where we see our angle of really changing the message a little bit, or really helping athletes understand, hey, this is for you. And this is not just something for the Trevor Lawrences of the world. And We're all about more of a custom and hands-on approach rather than we feel like the needs, for instance, of Nebraska will be very different to the needs of a D2 school or an NAIA school. And it's very important that you provide those schools with something that is tailored to the needs and wants of their athletes, their coaches, and administration. And that's what we're really, very big on. We provide a variety of different services in the categories of education, brand development, and brand collaboration. But what a school really needs and wants is something that really then allows us to tailor that program to that specific partner.
I guess a lot to unpack there.
Sorry, yeah.
Yes. So to start with, if you are not in the 1%, what's the advice you give to those athletes on developing a social media image and like building that brand?
Well, I think it really comes back to, again, the storytelling a little bit. I think athletes need to understand that the sport that they play, the school that they represent is a big part of who they are and their story, but it's not all of it. It's not what defines them. So these athletes need to really think about what is it that I'm passionate about? What are my strengths? And then figure out a way how to use something like social media as a tool to reach those audiences, to connect with those audiences that align with who they are, who they want to be. So again, if I'm looking back to my time, I was a tennis player. I was an international student athlete, but I was really big into graphic design, into music, and I had other passions. And those open up opportunities that you may not think about until you realize that there's more than just the number of followers that I have that will play into it. Because a lot of brands, for instance, when it comes to collaborating with athletes, they look for audience fit. And if a big part of your following, for instance, is from your hometown or from, again, if you're a music songwriter, right, and you have a lot of audience members that kind of follow you because of that, you can reach an audience that specific brands will look for that somebody with 50,000 followers may not reach, right? So I think to answer your question, I think the most important piece is for athletes to really unwrap who they are, what their story is, what they're passionate about, what their strengths are, and then, have, in a perfect world, us or someone like us or the athletic department kind of help them build a brand around that they can then monetize. And whether that's through brand endorsements or, them starting a company in that space or launching a podcast about it, about anything that they're passionate about, or running camps and clinics and leveraging their talents on the field, for instance, to make money. That's then a whole different story. But I think that's very important for athletes to understand that there's more to me than just my sport, and really figure out what those things are.
Yeah, and what are current athletes like? How do current athletes talk about this? Like, do they have a pretty good grasp on social media and what it can do? Like, my guess is we're talking about a Gen Z group of people that they've grown up around social media, that they have a good feel of how to do it. But is that a correct assumption? Yeah, definitely.
I mean, there's social media is something that the vast majority of athletes want to be on, are familiar with, and in a perfect world would love to capitalize on. And you have, again, the Trevor Lawrences of the world and other many top tier athletes that already have a strong brand on social, whether it's for their athletic performance or for something else that they have done. But again, the ones that have 1,000 followers or 2,000 or 5,000 on either social medium, they just need to understand that this is for them as well. And I feel like that's maybe where athletes at this point, and granted, this is such a, this is brand new. I'm sure the conversation will shift in that direction eventually, but they may not think about it as much from, hey, I can actually make a lot of money off of this, or I can make money off of this in the first place, but rather just see, what those conversations and the general public are about, which is, again, the top tier athletes and their large social audiences that can make $100,000 a year. Or estimated to make $100,000 a year or more. Those athletes, they understand it. Some of those other ones with the smaller audiences, I think they need to, it will probably take them a little bit to realize it.
Yes, yeah, and you just mentioned the different things that an athlete could do, like run a camp or start a podcast. Like all of those, I wouldn't have thought of. it's just interesting. How about athletic departments? How are they talking about it? And is there a difference in like when you're talking to different athletic departments and like their grasp of social media and how it can be applied? And then is there ever a disconnect like where they just are like have no clue what social media, the power of social media?
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of differences depending on who you talk to, and even within conferences or within the same geography. It's really, you can talk to a Power 5 school in the morning that says, look, this is exactly what we need. This is exactly what we're looking for. And you talk to another Power 5 school a couple hours later that says something very different. It's really, it really depends on what that athletic department cares about and what they're trying to accomplish. And sure, social media is usually always a part of the conversation, but again, we've had conversation with athletic departments that only need help, for instance, with the educational side. You've had other ones that only care about the compliance side and are worried about their athletes screwing something up. You have other ones that don't really, want to invest too much into providing anything to their athlete at this point. You have other ones that won't even talk to you until the rules are officially in place in January.
Yes, yeah. And so, Chris, this is my last question for you. If you were a freshman in college now, entering your freshman year with these new rule changes, what's the thing you would be focusing on to build that strong brand that can be monetized as a college athlete?
For me personally, probably camps here in Lincoln and clinics, because, you said if I'm a freshman, I come in, let's make this sophomore, because after my first year, I knew I had a certain reputation here in town, and I already did, have a few accolades and awards under my belt. I know that I could have promoted myself as a coach and somebody that runs a camp and a clinic and make quite a decent chunk of money off of it here in town and working with some local kids and stuff. So that is something that I probably would have pursued. Personally, that probably would have been the first thing I would have done, but who knows what else?
What advice would you give to yourself back then? Because you've had a very, kind of windy, and I don't mean that derogatory, but you've had like sort of a windy career path. Is there anything you would tell yourself that after going through it, like what would you tell yourself?
I honestly think that this whole personal branding thing is something I wish I would have paid more attention to, because I didn't, frankly, especially when I was in college. I mean, hardly utilized social media, hardly, really thought about what I wanted to do from a personal branding perspective. It was more or less just, hey, this would be kind of cool to do at some point in my life, and this is probably what I want to do, and this is maybe the next step, but never really, thought about it from a, if I end up building my personal brand, this will open up a lot of doors kind of perspective. So that's something I wish I would have paid more attention to if I could go back in time and did a little bit of work on that front.
Amazing. Well, Chris, thank you again for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Nick. Appreciate it.
Yes, likewise. Again, special thanks to today's sponsor of this episode, Runza. So Runza is having their chili and cinnamon rolls. They are back on the menu. So chili has been on Runza's menu since 1949. Donald Everett, who is the current president and former Commonwealth guest, so check out that episode. His grandmother started Runza, and she put chili and cinnamon rolls, and they have perfected the recipe ever since. It's one of my absolute favorite things to order. Head on over to Runza's Facebook page, like and follow their content. And then when you make it to Runza, tell them the Commonwealth sent you. We could not make the show without Runza's support. So again, thank you to Runza.
The Commonwealth is edited by Kyle Kua, directed by Alec McChesney, and produced in partnership with KZUM Radio. Special thanks to Emmy Hernandez and Isabel Cheeseman for creative guidance. That is it for today's episode. Thanks for being a member of the Commonwealth. If you enjoyed this conversation, please tap the share button and send it out to your friends and family. We would also love if you leave a review in the Apple Podcast app. If you're interested in helping us grow this community, please go invite your friends to like us on our Facebook page. Search the Commonwealth on Facebook and tap the profile with the same logo as ours. When you go to the community section of our page, there is an option to invite friends. Please also tap subscribe to stay updated when new episodes drop.